Good morning, friends. I want to start with a story. A few years ago, I was in a conversation with a friend, someone I deeply respect, and I was about to jump in to fill the silence, to make sure they knew I had something to contribute. But for some reason, I didn't. I just sat there, silent. And in that silence, something incredible happened. They opened up. They told me something real. And I realized so much of life, so much of what we're chasing is already trying to reach us, but we're too busy talking, controlling, explaining to even notice it. We live in a world that tells us, speak up, hustle, push harder. But let me ask you something. How often do we mistake noise for progress? How often do we drown out the very things trying to find us? Silence is not passive. Silence is powerful. Silence is what happens right before truth shows up. It's in the stillness that we hear what we're really feeling. It's in the quiet that answers reveal themselves. Not because we hunted them down, but because they were there all along, waiting for us to stop long enough to see them. But here's the hard part. Silence demands trust. Trust that if we stop talking, stop forcing, stop filling every space, life will still move. It demands that we sit with our discomfort, with the unknown, and believe that what's meant for us will find its way. And it will. Everything you are chasing, clarity, peace, belonging, it doesn't need to be caught. It needs to be allowed. So my challenge to you today is this. Stay silent, stay open, stay still long enough for life to catch up with you. Because when you do, you won't have to go looking for the right path. The right path will find you. We've been taught to fill every space with words. Every pause is uncomfortable. Every silence, awkward. We're conditioned to respond quickly, think fast, keep talking, because silence is often mistaken for emptiness. But what if that's one of the biggest lies we've ever bought into? What if silence isn't a void at all, but a vessel, one holding the very things we're desperate to hear? See, silence doesn't mean absence. Silence is presence. It's the full, open, pulsing presence of truth, waiting patiently for us to quiet the noise long enough to notice it. Think about the last time you sat in silence. Not the kind where you're scrolling your phone or running through a mental to-do list, but true, still silence. It's rare, isn't it? And when it does happen, it can feel almost unbearable. That's not because there's nothing there. It's because there's so much there. Emotion, memory, fear, longing, our own voice that we haven't listened to in years. And when we finally let ourselves be still, all of it begins to surface. Silence becomes the amplifier of what matters. It doesn't erase our truth, it reveals it. What I've come to learn through research, stories, and my own soul wrestling is that silence holds the answers we keep chasing. We want clarity? Sit still. We want creativity? Make space. We want connection? Listen without needing to respond. And yet, instead of leaning into silence, we run from it. We fill our days with noise and movement and tasks because the stillness feels like surrender. But here's the paradox. Only in surrender do we get strong enough to receive what's real. Silence is not passive, it's active receptivity. This doesn't mean we stop speaking up or stop engaging with the world. It means we learn the rhythm between sound and stillness. We learn that there is a time to speak and a time to listen, not just to others, but to ourselves. Silence allows our intuition, our deep knowing to rise to the surface. It gives our nervous system a moment to reset. It lets our brains and hearts sync up. It's the breath between notes that makes the music possible. Without silence, we're just noise machines, disconnected from meaning, running on empty. I remember sitting in a leadership circle a few years ago where the facilitator invited us to pause before responding every time someone spoke. Just 5 seconds. That's it. And I'll tell you what happened. Everything shifted. The conversation deepened. People stopped performing and started sharing. We heard each other more clearly. That silence between voices gave us space to reflect, not react. And it was in those small, sacred pauses that the most profound truths emerged, not just about leadership, but about humanity. The silence made the space safe. So why don't we trust silence more? Because we're afraid of what we'll find there. When everything gets quiet, we're left with ourselves. And if we haven't learned to love or even tolerate ourselves, that can feel terrifying. But silence isn't the enemy. The real enemy is the story we tell ourselves about what silence means. We say, I must be doing something wrong, or they're judging me, or I need to say something now or I'll lose control. But those are fear voices, not truth voices. When we learn to sit through the discomfort, to breathe through the quiet, we begin to realize silence never hurts us. It heals us. Let's be clear. This isn't about disengagement. This isn't about avoidance or withdrawal. This is about becoming so anchored in ourselves that we no longer need to shout to be heard, no longer need to perform to be valued. Silence helps us recalibrate. It gives us back to ourselves. When we stop trying to control every moment with our words, we open the door to wisdom that's been knocking for years. Wisdom that doesn't yell, it whispers. And it's only in the silence that we finally have ears to hear it. We like to believe we talk because we have something to say, and sometimes that's true, but often, far more often than we'd like to admit, we talk because silence feels dangerous. Silence feels like we're not steering the ship. So what do? We fill it. We speak to fill the space, to steer the direction of the conversation, to make sure we're heard, understood, and, let's be honest, safe. Talking, for many of us, isn't just communication. It's a kind of armor. It's how we try to manage uncertainty. When we talk, we feel like we're in charge. We're setting the tone, managing perceptions, leading the narrative. We control the tempo and the direction. There's a seductive comfort in being the one holding the conversational wheel. But here's the truth that hits hard. We're not always talking from a place of connection. Sometimes we're talking from a place of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being enough, fear of losing control. And when fear is driving, we're not connecting, we're performing. The need to control through conversation often comes from a wound we haven't looked at. Maybe you grew up in a home where being silent meant being invisible. Or maybe you were told that if you didn't speak up fast and loud, you wouldn't matter. So now as an adult, you talk your way through discomfort. You narrate, explain, justify. You stay busy with your words so you don't have to sit with what's really going on underneath. But deep down, you know, you're not just talking, you're protecting yourself. One of the hardest and most transformative lessons I've ever learned is that not every silence needs to be filled, and not every feeling needs to be explained in real time. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is sit in the unknown without rushing to narrate it. That moment of holding back, of not controlling the situation with our words, isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It says, I trust this moment enough to let it be what it is. And that's terrifying, but it's also deeply freeing. Because it's in those moments we realize control was never the goal. Clarity was. When we stop trying to control the moment, we start to witness it. We actually see the other person. We actually hear ourselves. And it's in that witnessing that intimacy is born. Control gives us order, sure, but witnessing gives us connection. We have to choose. Do we want to manage the moment or experience it? Do we want to control the conversation or cultivate something real inside of it? Because we can't do both. Real connection can't grow in the shadow of control. It needs the light of vulnerability. And this applies everywhere. In our families, in our relationships, in our leadership. How many times have we sat in a meeting and watched someone talk for 20 minutes without really saying anything? That's not connection, that's control. That's someone filling space because they're afraid of silence, afraid of not knowing, afraid of appearing less than. And you know what? We've all been that person. We've all talked over the moment we needed to feel. But the invitation is always there. Pause, breathe, release the grip. You don't need to control everything to be worthy. So here's what I've learned. The world doesn't fall apart when we stop talking. In fact, some of the most powerful shifts happen in the quiet. When we trust silence, we stop using our voice as a shield. We start using it as a bridge between who we think we need to be and who we really are. A bridge between us and them. A bridge between the chaos of control and the calm of presence. And that's where we come alive. Not in the noise, but in the space where we finally let go. We live in a culture that is obsessed with being heard, but we rarely talk about the power of listening. And I don't mean surface level, nod along listening. I mean soul deep, eye soft, heart open listening. The kind that requires stillness. The kind that only becomes possible when we stop trying to fix, save, or respond. The kind that lives in the space silence makes. You see, silence doesn't just make room for connection. Silence is the room. Without it, all we're doing is talking over each other's truths. When someone is brave enough to be vulnerable with us, to share something messy or real, they're not looking for a fast reply. They're looking to feel safe, seen, and not alone. That kind of safety doesn't come from clever responses or instant advice. It comes from presence. It comes from the quiet, grounded energy of I'm here with you, I'm not going anywhere. But here's the kicker. Being present requires restraint. It asks us to put down our egos, resist the urge to fix, and sit with someone in their moment without making it about us. That is hard. That is sacred. We're so conditioned to perform in conversations, especially in moments of discomfort. We rush in with a silver lining, a story of our own, or worse, a solution that no one asked for. Why? Because silence makes us anxious. It feels like we're not doing enough. But that's not true. In fact, silence in a conversation can be one of the most generous things we offer. When we allow space between someone's words and our response, we give their truth time to breathe. We're saying, your words matter enough to be held, not hurried. And in that space, right there in the pause, connection grows. Because for the first time, that person isn't just being heard, they're being felt. Real connection isn't transactional. It's not about the back and forth exchange of clever comments. It's about resonance. And resonance requires room. Without space, without silence, we don't resonate. We just ricochet off each other. But when we allow stillness into our conversations, we create a kind of emotional echo chamber. Not one that bounces things back, but one that holds and amplifies truth. Now, let me be honest. This doesn't come easy for most of us, especially those of us who are used to being the helper, the fixer, the speaker. We pride ourselves on knowing what to say, and in many situations that's a gift. But connection doesn't always need our wisdom. Sometimes it needs our witness. And witnessing, true witnessing, begins with silence. It begins with slowing down enough to say, you don't have to earn my attention. You don't have to rush. I'm not going anywhere. I've seen this most clearly in grief. When someone is grieving, there are no right words, no perfect phrases, and often when we try to fill the space with platitudes, we unintentionally make it harder. But when we're silent, not cold, but warm, grounded, and present, we give the other person a safe container to fall apart in. And that's everything. That's connection. Not because we had the perfect thing to say, but because we made room for the imperfect to be fully felt. Silence creates space for people to be human. That's where connection happens. So many of us are walking around desperate to be seen, to be understood, to be held in the truth of who we are. But we forget we all carry the power to give that to each other. And it starts with silence. It starts with the courage to not rush in, to not interrupt, to not fill the air with our need to be useful. When we lead with stillness, we lead with love. And love, real love, lives in the space we create, not in the noise we make. Trust. It's one of those words that sounds simple but lives in the marrow of every relationship, every decision, every risk. When we stay silent, when we choose not to intervene, not to fill the space, not to direct the outcome, we are practicing trust in its rawest, most vulnerable form. Not just trust in people, but trust in the process. Trust that life will unfold, even when we're not narrating it. Trust that we don't have to steer every single moment for it to carry us exactly where we need to go. But let's be real, trust is terrifying, especially for those of us who have been hurt, disappointed, or let down after giving it freely. We learn early on that control can feel safer than trust. If we can just stay one step ahead, keep talking, keep explaining, keep doing, then maybe we can avoid the fall. Maybe we can outmaneuver pain, avoid ambiguity, and stay in the driver's seat. But here's the truth. Control is a short-term comfort with long-term consequences. Because while control may protect us from chaos, it also blocks us from connection, creativity, and growth. When we choose silence, we are surrendering the illusion of control. We're saying, I trust that I don't need to force this moment to be meaningful. I trust that truth will rise without my constant commentary. That's not easy. In fact, it can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff with no harness, no script, no plan. But that's exactly where our power lies, in the willingness to trust that we don't need to perform or push to be safe, to be seen, or to belong. Silence becomes a kind of sacred risk. And here's where it gets deeply personal. Staying silent means trusting yourself. Trusting that what you've said is enough. Trusting that who you are without explanation is worthy. Trusting that you don't have to fill the gap to earn love, respect, or value. Most of us were never taught that kind of trust. We were taught that worth is tied to productivity, to words, to action. So when we stay silent, our nervous system panics. It screams, do something. But learning to stay still, to stay present in silence, is a radical act of self-trust. That's the kind of trust that rewires us. It shifts the way we lead, love, parent, and show up. Because when we stop trying to manage the narrative, we start to hear what's real. We create space for others to rise. We give conversations room to evolve naturally. We start trusting that growth doesn't always need a blueprint. It often needs breathing room. And let me tell you, in leadership, that's transformational. Leaders who trust enough to sit in silence during tough moments are leaders who build cultures of safety and respect. It's not about doing less, it's about allowing more. This trust also changes how we relate to others. When we stop interrupting every silence with advice, noise, or direction, we send a message. I trust you. I trust your process. I trust your voice. I trust that you don't need me to fix or save or perform. That's empowering. That's how people learn to trust themselves. And when people feel trusted, they rise, they speak more freely, they show up more authentically, and ironically, all the things we were trying to force through our words, clarity, momentum, direction, start to show up on their own. So yes, silence requires trust, immense trust. It asks us to unclench our grip, to lay down our armor, to believe that something meaningful can happen without our constant input. It's not passive, it's not giving up, it's choosing presence over performance. It's choosing belief over control. And if that feels terrifying, that's okay. That just means you're growing. That just means you're stepping into the wild, beautiful territory of letting go. Somewhere along the way, we started believing that insight is something we have to wrestle to the ground. That if we hustle hard enough, think fast enough, talk long enough, the truth will reveal itself. But that's not how insight works. Truth doesn't come when we chase it with clenched fists. Insight doesn't arrive in the noise. It floats up in the stillness, quietly, gently, like a feather landing in the palm of your hand. But we miss it when we're moving too fast or filling every pause with more noise. I remember a conversation I had with a leader I admire. She was brilliant, driven, and exhausted. She kept saying, I just need to think my way through this. I said, what if thinking harder is actually making it harder? And she paused. That was it. That one moment of silence gave her the clarity she'd been trying to force for weeks. That's what stillness does. It clears the fog. We're too busy to notice we're in. When we stop chasing answers, we create space for them to come to us. Creativity, too, is born in the quiet. I can't tell you how many times I've sat at my desk, grinding away at a problem, hitting wall after wall, only to finally give up and go for a walk, and boom, there it is. The answer, the image, the idea. Not because I pushed harder, but because I let go. When we're silent, when we stop grasping and striving, something inside us relaxes. And that's when creativity, our truest, most inspired voice, starts to speak. Not with force, with flow. But stillness isn't just a strategy. It's a spiritual practice. It's a willingness to believe that the wisdom we're looking for is already inside us. We just have to quiet the noise long enough to hear it. And let me be clear, that noise isn't just external, it's internal too. It's the voice of self-doubt, comparison, perfectionism. The one that says you need to do more, be more, prove more. When we practice silence, we stop feeding that voice. We turn down the volume on fear and turn up the volume on truth. One of the most profound insights from my research is that people often know exactly what they need, but they're afraid to trust it. So they keep asking, keep talking, keep thinking in circles, hoping for permission. But silence doesn't give you permission. It gives you perspective. It reconnects you to the wisdom you forgot you already had. That moment of quiet, that breath, that pause isn't empty. It's full of answers. But we can't hear them when we're constantly drowning in the sound of our own striving. And this isn't about stepping away from effort. This isn't about abandoning discipline or ambition. It's about shifting the source of our effort from frantic pursuit to focused presence. It's about remembering that sometimes the best thing we can do is stop, breathe, and listen. That's when things crystallize. That's when the pieces come together, because clarity isn't something we conquer. It's something we receive. Stillness is the container that catches it when it arrives. So if you're searching for insight, if you're desperate for direction, if you're overwhelmed by all the noise inside and around you, try this. Stop. Just stop for a moment. Let it be quiet. Let it be awkward even. And trust that in the stillness, something true is trying to surface. You don't have to chase it down. Just make room. Just wait. Because when we stop long enough to listen, not with our ears, but with our whole hearts, that's when the truth finally speaks. Let's clear something up right now. Stillness is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not giving up or checking out. In fact, choosing stillness in a world addicted to urgency might be one of the boldest acts of courage we can make. It's easy to react. It's easy to jump in, fix, defend, distract. But to stay present in the discomfort, to not react, to feel without fleeing, to observe without interrupting, that takes grit. That takes grounding. Stillness isn't what we do when we have nothing to offer. It's what we do when we're finally ready to offer something real. We live in a culture that worships speed. Fast talkers are seen as smart. Fast responders are seen as capable. Quick fixes are praised like gold. But speed often sacrifices depth. And when we move too fast, we miss the nuance. We bypass the emotion. We skip over the complexity. Stillness slows us down enough to see what's actually happening, not what we assumed, not what we feared, but what is. That kind of seeing requires intention. It asks us to choose presence over performance. That's not passive. That's power under control. One of the hardest truths I've had to learn, and I still wrestle with it, is that reacting quickly often comes from a place of fear. We think we're being helpful, we think we're being efficient, but sometimes we're just trying to get away from the discomfort of feeling. Stillness demands we stay. It asks, can you sit here with this? Can you not fix it? Can you let it speak to you before you speak over it? That is anything but passive. That is emotional strength. That's the kind of strength that doesn't look flashy, but changes everything. And let's be honest, stillness is uncomfortable. It exposes things. When we stop reacting, we start feeling. We start noticing what's going on in our bodies, our relationships, our choices. We become witnesses to our inner world. And that can be confronting, but it's also liberating, because when we stop reacting, we start reclaiming. We take our power back from reactivity. We start choosing how to respond instead of being yanked around by every trigger and every expectation. That's not passivity, that's mastery. Stillness also creates space for wisdom. It lets us access the deeper, quieter voice inside, the one that isn't panicking, isn't hustling for approval, isn't trying to be right. That voice, the one that lives below the noise, is often drowned out by constant reaction. But when we choose stillness, when we choose to not send the text, not fire back the email, not speak just to fill the gap, that voice finally gets to rise. And when it does, we often realize we didn't need to react at all. We just needed to listen. This is especially true in our relationships. How many fights, misunderstandings, or moments of deep regret could have been softened, maybe even avoided, if we had taken a moment of stillness before responding? One breath, one pause, one beat of space between the trigger and our reply. That space is everything. That's where emotional intelligence lives. That's where empathy lives. Stillness gives us access to the parts of ourselves that want to connect, not just win. And in that space, we often find that what we really needed wasn't to be right, it was to be real. So, no, stillness is not doing nothing. It is not detaching. It is not giving up. Stillness is choosing presence over panic, observation over assumption, feeling over fleeing. It is a conscious, embodied decision to stay with ourselves, with others, with the truth of the moment. And in that staying, in that brave, uncomfortable silence, something sacred begins to unfold. We stop reacting from the fear-based parts of us, and we start responding from the truth-based parts. That's where healing begins. That's where transformation starts. So here's what I want to leave you with. In a world that equates noise with value and urgency with importance, choosing silence, choosing stillness is an act of radical self-trust. It's not about disengaging, it's about tuning in. It's about trusting that we don't have to fill every space, fix every problem, or prove our worth with every word. When we stay silent, we're not withdrawing. We're making room for truth, for clarity, for connection, for grace. Everything doesn't have to be chased. Some things, the most important things, find us when we're quiet enough to receive them. So stay still, stay soft, stay open. Let the silence speak, because when it does, what comes through will be more honest, more whole, and more powerful than anything we could have forced into being. That's not just the art of stillness, that's the heart of courage.